Thomas lived at the edge of the prairie, where the roads faded into the horizon, no longer promising to take a man anywhere worth going. His house stood alone, weathered and weary, as if it too had endured loss and no longer sought company. An old barn leaned into wind, a crooked fence barely kept its shape, and a few trees, bent and scarred by endless gusts, clung to the stubborn soil. Everything about the place was as silent and guarded as Thomas himself. Since his wife had passed, he spoke only when necessary. He invited no guests, bought nothing beyond what he needed, and didn't even keep a dog. Silence had become his truest companion, the only thing that never left him. The day she appeared was like all the others, dusty and harsh. The wind dragged its fingers across the land, lifting the dry earth into the air, as if trying to erase the memory of footsteps. But there she was, moving through it, barefoot and quiet, in a thin dress that might have once been blue. Her face was streaked with dirt, her hair tangled by the wind. She asked for nothing, not mercy, not food, only looked at it with eyes the color of storm clouds, and waited. Thomas stood on the porch, a mug of coffee warm in his rough hand, and froze. She stopped a few paces from him, neither drawing nearer nor turning away. Her feet were raw and bleeding, one palm scraped and red. Her shoulders trembled despite the sun's warmth. "Are you alone?" he asked, voice low and careful. She said nothing, only watched him with the gaze of something hurt too often to trust kindness. "Did someone chase you?" Again, silence. He studied her for what felt like forever, as if searching her eyes for some hidden reason to care, some sign that saving her wouldn't be a mistake. "I have water and a bed. You can stay," he said at last, as calmly as if he were speaking of the weather, "until you decide to leave." She nodded just once, and he noticed then how badly she was shaking. He stepped aside and opened the door. She slipped past him like a shadow, careful not to brush him with so much as her eyes. That night, Thomas lay awake, staring at the dark beams overhead, listening to the uneasy quiet of a house that had grown used to emptiness. The silence that once comforted him now felt restless, as if it too had been disturbed by her presence. Before dawn, he rose out of habit, brewed coffee, set water to boil. The second room, once a guest room, long forgotten, remained still. When he returned from the porch, she was at the table, sitting straight in the same tattered dress, her hair finger-combed, her face wary but calm. "Did you sleep?" he asked. She nodded, a small movement, like the stir of wind in tall grass. "I'm Thomas." She offered no name in return. He pushed a mug of water toward her. She took it with both hands, as if afraid she'd spill it, and drank slowly. Her eyes wandered, not at him, but at the broom in the corner, the dusty shelves, the crumbs by the stove. Without asking, she rose, took the broom, and began to clean. She moved like a whisper, sweeping the room bare of dust and memory. She didn't look at him for permission. She didn't seek his thanks. It was as if she were saying, "I'm here, but I won't be a burden." He watched her gather spilled flour, wipe the window's grime, and as the room grew cleaner, it felt as if the air itself became easier to breathe. Not because of the dust, but because someone at last seemed to want to stay. On the third day, he gave her a name, not from affection, but because calling her girl felt wrong. "Leah," he said that evening, pushing aside his plate of beans. "That was my sister's name. She didn't live long, but she was bright." She didn't respond. But the next morning, when he called, "Leah, fetch water from the well," she came, without question. He noticed how her hands, thin, cautious, moved with quiet skill. His own hands, cracked and callous, were made for work, not gentleness. That evening, as he fought with stubborn harness strap, cursing under his breath so as not to alarm her, he felt a presence beside him. Leah knelt opposite, silent. She didn't ask. She didn't speak. She simply took a warm cloth and, with steady fingers, cleaned the dirt from his hands, rubbed salve into the cracks. He flinched at first and used a such touch, but couldn't pull away. She worked like someone soothing a frightened colt, and he realized that his hands trembled, not from toil, but from the shock of being cared for. That night, he sat by the fire, staring at the embers, sleepless. The thought came to him. She doesn't speak, but she hears. not with her ears, but with her scars. And when he heard the faint creak of the floorboards in her room, the soft steps of one more soul haunted by night, he understood. There were two of them in that house now, one who had lost love, and one who had never known it. Maybe together they could learn that not all silence had to hurt. Days unfolded like pages turned by a slow, steady hand. Leah cleaned, worked, moved through the house as if trying to stitch it back together, piece by piece. In the barn, she found the old saddle, his wife's, and touched it, her fingers tracing the cracked leather. Without words, she told him what he had tried not to see. This can be mended. And so she began by firelight to sew the broken pieces together, as if the saddle, like him, was worth saving. The silence between them grew soft, no longer heavy or sharp, but warm, like bread fresh in the oven, like a quiet promise. He watched her work, marveled at the grace of her hands. And when at last he asked, "You ever ride?" she nodded, small but sure. So he saddled the gentlest mare, Ella, his wife's old companion. When he let her out, Leah didn't rush. She offered her hand, flat and steady, to the horse's nose. Ella stepped forward, trusting, as if recognizing something familiar in this quiet girl. Thomas said nothing, but inside, something eased. He helped Leah into the saddle, watched her sit tall, as if her body remembered what her heart had been made to forget. They rode together, side by side, into the clean prairie morning, and the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things unspoken, of things waiting to be found. The wind carried the dust away, and for the first time in a long while, Thomas wondered if maybe the road, after all, still led somewhere. When the wind swept through the tall prairie grass, it carried with it the softest sounds, the rustle of the world waking or resting. And though Thomas barely noticed them, she did. He saw it in the way her fingers would twitch, as if trying to grasp the quiet music that the breeze brought. It was a gesture so small, so fleeting, that it might have gone unnoticed, but not to him. Not anymore. One afternoon, as he worked to set a broken fence post back into the stubborn earth, she approached. Without a word, she laid a small, worn notebook on the rough-hewn table beside him. The leather cover was faded, edges frayed from being opened and closed too many times. He wiped his hands on his trousers, curiosity stirring, and opened it. The pages inside were filled with looping letters, careful and precise, words familiar, phrases that surprised him. She leaned closer and pointed to one line. "I hear the wind, but not the words." His throat tightened, as if the prairie dust had lodged there. That simple sentence carried a weight heavier than any words he could have spoken, a truth wrapped in pain so deep it left him breathless. He wanted to say something that might ease the ache he now saw in her, to offer comfort, but all he managed was a soft, understanding nod. Then, without thinking, he knelt and drew shapes in the dust at his feet. A circle, a horse, a small figure that was her. She watched, eyes wide, and when he finished, she traced his drawing with finger, gentle and slow. No words passed between them, but none were needed. In that quiet exchange, for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, a fragile flicker of hope. That evening, the sky bled into bruised purples and golds as the sun fell behind the endless plains. The fire crackled low, casting its glow in soft, flickering patterns across the cabin's worn walls. She sat by the hearth, hands folded in her lap, gaze fixed on the flames as if searching for answers within them. He watched from his chair, a cup of coffee cooling between his palms. When a sudden crack from the fire startled her, he saw the tremor that ran through her frame and his heart ached. Slowly, carefully, he slid his hand closer to hers, resting it near enough that she could feel its warmth, but not so near as to frighten her. She didn't draw back. Instead, she lifted her gaze, eyes meeting his, uncertain, searching, fragile. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The wind, the prairie, the weight of all the lonely years faded. He cleared his throat, voice rough with emotion, and spoke, not to fill the silence, but to honor it. "My wife loved this fire," he said, his tone gentle, steady. "Every night we'd sit just like this, just watching it burn." She nodded, listening, absorbing each word like sunlight on frost. He told her small things, Not grand stories, but memories of laughter shared, of quiet moments that now lived only in his heart. The sorrow was there, woven through his words, but it had softened over time, like an old scar touched by the warmth of the sun. As the stars awakened above, blinking into life one by one, he realized she was no longer simply a stranger beneath his roof. She was becoming part of his story, part of a chapter he thought had ended long ago. The next morning dawned soft and cool, dew clinging to the grass like tiny jewels scattered across the land. The ranch stirred gently to life. The murmur of cattle, the rooster's distant crow, the hush of the wind threading through the trees. She stood on the porch, watching as he prepared the horses, her fingers idly tracing the edge of a leather glove he'd left behind. He caught her glance, offered a small, shy smile, and she stepped forward, reaching out to touch the worn reins of saddle. A simple gesture, but it spoke of trust, of a wish to belong. Together they worked through the day, mending fences, hauling water, tending to the horses. His world, once sealed and rigid, seemed to open quietly in her presence. He noticed the way her gaze softened as she took in the land, the way she moved with a grace that spoke of someone trying not to disturb the fragile peace she'd found. At noon, they rested beneath the wide canopy of an old oak. He drew out the notebook she had given him and, with care, wrote a single word. Trust. He slid it toward her, and when she looked down at it, then back at him, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. In that moment, beneath the golden prairie light, something delicate and new took root between them. As the days grew warmer, the prairie stretched endless and pale beneath a wide sky. But even in that calm, the shadows of the past stirred. One evening, as dusk settled and the first stars blinked in the deepening blue, a sharp noise echoed from the distant town. The slam of a door, sudden and harsh. She froze, her fingers gripping the armrest of her chair, eyes wide with remembered fear. Thomas noticed at once. Without speaking, he stepped closer, his presence steady and sure, like an anchor against the storm rising inside her. That night, sleep escaped her. The darkness brought back fragments of memory, a drunken voice, angry shouts, betrayal heavy as iron. He sat beside her, saying nothing, only draping a blanket over her shoulders, his quiet understanding more comforting than any words. Morning light filtered soft through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. She sat at the window, tracing shapes in the dust, watching the ranch wake around her. The low hum of insects, the clatter of hooves, the breeze in the trees. When he entered, boots heavy against the boards, she started slightly, then relaxed at the sight of him. His voice was low, gentle. "I don't expect you to speak." "Not yet." She met his gaze, something unreadable in her eyes. He drew a small wooden box from his coat, opened it to reveal a delicate silver pendant shaped like a feather. "It was hers," he said softly. It helped her find peace when words failed. She reached out, hesitant, fingertips brushing the cool metal, and then, barely audible, her voice cracked the silence. "Thank you." The days that followed unfolded like the slow, swaying grass. Each one brought them closer, bound them tighter in a quiet understanding. One evening, beneath a sky painted in amber and crimson, they sat side by side on the porch. The breeze carried the sound of a distant creek, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, she reached out, placed her hand atop his, fingers trembling but sure. His heart ached at the simple, powerful gesture. "Your silence," he whispered. "It's not a wall. It's a door." She squeezed his hand gently, and together they faced the night, wrapped in possibility, hope blooming in the hush between them. And in the soft light of dawn, as golden rays spilled across the cabin walls, he worked at his bench, mending a broken saddle strap. She watched him, her eyes full of cautious trust, curiosity bright within them. When he paused, looking at the scars and calluses of his own hands, she reached out, brushing her fingers over the rough skin, as if to soothe the years of labor etched there. He offered his hand, and she took it, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. In her touch, there was gentleness, healing, and for the first time in so long, his hands felt less alone. Days passed, unhurried and rich with small moments that spoke louder than speech. One afternoon, as the sky glowed with the promise of dusk, They sat together by the fire pit. She drew circles in the dirt with a stick, hesitating, then spoke. The words fragile whispered. I was sold by my father. The weight of her confession hung heavy in the air. Thomas reached out, his hand rough but tender, covering hers. You're safe now. Her eyes filled with tears, but she met his gaze, no longer hiding behind walls. And in that moment, beneath the endless sky, they found courage to face what had been and a hope for what might be. The morning that followed was crisp and clear. Sunlight filtered to the cabin, dust motes dancing like stars in quiet. She sat at the table, chalk in hand, and wrote one word on a slate. Home. Her breath caught as she looked to him for his reaction. His smile, slow and soft, lit his face. That's where you belong, he said. And for the first time, she spoke what her heart had long carried. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with promise. Together, they stepped into the new day, the prairie wide and golden before them, the ranch alive with the soft sounds of life. No words were needed. In their gaze and their quiet togetherness was everything. Pain and healing, fear and courage, loss and love. Two souls, mended at last, ready to write the next chapter.